Internet, and welcome to my 5th United States travel diary. Now, this is where things start to a certain degree to get good, because this is where me and my father started our travels together, more specifically in the summer of 2010. So that means that this was the first trip where we didn't have either elderly family members that simply couldn't go all that far or see all that much, or annoying family members who absolutely would not, because they absolutely had to be at the hotel so they could be lying at the pool by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So yeah, this was where we actually started seeing the country and started seeing a lot of stuff, so enjoy. This vacation that me and my dad was going to take was a round trip in the western United States. Basically from San Francisco to San Francisco, but by seeing a lot of stuff in the western United States. So yeah, for the first time we were going to be alone and we were going to be in the Wild West when we left our house. So yeah, well, as could be imagined, several times we were in the deepest peril for our lives, but eventually we did make it safely to Copenhagen Airport and got aboard the plane to San Francisco. That was about 13 hours flight to San Francisco in tourist class seats. As some of you might be aware, neither me or Daddy Sage is a small kind of gentleman, and that was also the trip where we twice, after having sat on tourist class seats going out and going back later, decided we would never do that again. In fact, at least when we were traveling to the West Coast, something that we have actually later kept to, either traveling in economy plus or business class or whatever, because that was hell. Now, arriving at San Francisco, we got our rental car easily enough and eventually found our hotel in the northern part of San Francisco near Pier 39, the famous tourist attraction. Now, the next day we had decided to take a sightseeing bus because we only had one day in San Francisco before we needed to leave, and we wanted to see as much as possible. And we were told that this tourist bus would be leaving from the ferry building down further alongside the San Francisco piers. And since we had seen that ferry building on the way to the hotel and felt like it wasn't that long, we decided to take a walk down there to see how long it would take so we could plan for when we needed to get up the next morning. So we did, and we walked. And I was in some very non-walkable flip-flop sandals because that was what I'd been wearing on the plane. And we walked. And we saw stuff, and it was warm and summery, and we walked. Because the little quick foot trip we had imagined was actually about 4.5 miles. Now, 4.5 miles isn't, of course, all that much, but once you've been sitting in a small, cramped airplane seat for 13 hours, and the time for you is actually around midnight after you got up around, say, perhaps 4 in the morning, and you're wearing flip-flops, it wasn't the best idea we ever had. But eventually we did get to the ferry building and decided that we were not going to walk there next morning. We were going to take the tram that anyway started right at our hotel and ran straight past the ferry building. However, since we were at the ferry building, my father decided that he wanted to go up a tiny bit on Market Street because he realized, from the last time he was in San Francisco, that just a tiny bit up Market Street there was a cable car going back to our hotel in through the rest of the city, up the hills and so on. So we did, and we walked a bit more, and by this point my feet were starting to ache a bit. In fact, they ached so much that I eventually had to use up almost an entire goddamn package of blister bandages because flip-flops were not good walking shoes. But we walked, and we walked a bit more, and it was interesting. It was in America, and everything was good. And then when we had walked about 3 miles or so again, and my feet were just about ready to kill me, and I was about to kill my father, we stopped to look at a street map to figure out just, where we were and where the hell that cable car was, and we determined that it was not where my father had remembered it was about a mile back from where we were. So he at that point generously offered to pay for a taxi cab to take us back to the hotel, but at this point I was angry, stubborn, and overall annoyed, so I might have snapped at him quite a bit and then tramped back the mile or so to the cable car stopping point where we paid our $5, which was the price at the time, and got on it for, admittedly, a very pretty and interesting trip back to our hotel. So all was good, right? Well, it seemed that my dad had forgotten just yet another thing, namely which cable car we were supposed to get on, because the one we took was the one that ended about a mile from our hotel, rather than the one who went straight up to it. So there was another mile of tramping around that part of San Francisco when we got there. Then when we reached the hotel, my feet, my mood, and my general sort of attitude towards this whole vacation had taken quite a bit of dip for the worse, and that was when my father decided, well, we're at the hotel, let's just get quickly dressed in some better clothes and then go out for dinner. There is only a short walk down to a restaurant that I want to introduce you to. At this particular point, I think he should be very happy that I was splayed on my bed and simply didn't have the energy to get up and strangle the man. But eventually we did get to the particular restaurant called Pompey's Grotto down at the San Francisco Northern Waterfront, around Pier 42, I think. You should definitely go there if you can, by the way. It's an amazing Italian and fish restaurant with some spectacular salmon dishes and crab cakes. But that was my first day in San Francisco. 8 miles walking after sitting on a cramped airplane seat for 13 hours and basically wishing I was dead and that I was taking my annoying and idiotic father with me. The next day, the second day, the first full day, and in fact the only full day we would have in San Francisco until we returned at the end of the trip, we were going to take this sightseeing bus, and my dad basically asked me in the morning if I wanted to take the short walk down to the ferry building or if we were going to take the tram. At this point, I didn't even answer him and just basically trumped ahead of him and placed myself at the tram station and waited. Anyway, at this point we had sort of become good friends again, mainly because he had hidden all my knives, so I couldn't, slaughter him brutally. And the trip around the city in the sightseeing bus was actually really interesting. We saw some of the old cathedrals, we saw some of the old houses, we saw the original center of San Francisco, where a certain Samuel Brennan cried out to the entire town in 1849 that there had been found gold in Sierra Nevada, and it was a glorious thing and everyone should go up there and hunt for gold, thus starting the whole California gold rush of those times. Of course, Brennan, being an enterprising sort of fellow, had, before he shouted out that all the gold had been found, managed to purchase every single bit of gold digging equipment in the entire greater San Francisco area, which he then decided to sell to anyone who actually would listen to him at possibly slightly inflated prices. It is worth noticing that Brennan was the first one to get famous from the famous and rich, of course, by the Californian gold rush without ever actually, getting his hands on a single ounce of gold. But, enterprising. As I said, we saw a very interesting cathedral in the town. There is, in the current picture now, of course, the famous 7 painted ladies, a sort of hallmark of San Francisco. And on this trip, we were actually fortunate enough to get inside to visit one, because the sightseeing company had a sort of gentleman's agreement with the owner of one of these 7 painted ladies. Later you will see particularly which house it is, which is sort of the end house on one of the ends. And it was very interesting to see one of these houses from the inside, because basically everyone has seen them on television eventually. But we got in and saw this house. It was he was very pleased with himself, because he was one of the few houses in San Francisco that still had gas lighting rather than electrical lights, and he also name dropped a bunch of fairly famous actors, and so that was either his neighbors or lived rather close to him that he managed to make and trade furniture with for various interesting stuff. It was all actually very interesting. Back then we were told that he was actually selling his house because it was getting too big for him and he was moving to somewhere else, so we might actually be the very last trip that were allowed inside that particular building to see it, though how much truth there was in that is unknown. It is, however, worth noticing that we were back 3 years later and took the same sightseeing bus. There was absolutely no mention of being able to get inside that house, so very possibly we were in fact just really lucky. Anyway, it was very interesting. We then moved on towards the Presidio. After a quick break in the Golden Gate Park, where we had about half an hour where the bus wasn't moving and we could choose to see either the Japanese Tea Garden or the tower at the Young Museum for Art, I chose the Young Museum for Art bathroom facility, since my bladder couldn't really handle a lot of walking around anymore. I have been drinking all day, and this was the first facility I managed to get to. But after that break, we moved on to the Presidio and crossed the Golden Gate Bridge. Amusingly enough, actually, without any fog. It's the only time I or my father has been in San Francisco where the Golden Gate Bridge has not been completely covered in the usual fog that plagues the area. So that was very, very fascinating and interesting. We moved on to the small town of Sausalito, where we had a quick lunch and then took the ferry back from Sausalito to the ferry building, where we arrived in about late afternoon after a very, very interesting sightseeing trip that I can only truly advise everyone to take if they want to see a lot of the really interesting stuff in San Francisco in a single day. At this point, we needed to get back to the hotel from the ferry building, and my father suggested a brisk little walk because, it was a very short time. I basically looked at him and we decided that taking the tram back was probably the wisest decision. So we did. After this, we wanted to see Pier 39, which is, as I said, of course, a famous tourist attraction. So we walked down there and caught all of the things that happened, the various, shows that was going on, street artists, just the whole shebang. It was very, very interesting. Again, this is a thing that if you're a tourist in San Francisco and you want touristy things without it becoming too much, Pier 39 is fairly good because you can participate. You can also just walk around without anything sort of really happening. There are the famous sea lions. We ended the day by eating dinner at a local Hard Rock cafe that's actually placed at Pier 39, and then we walked back to the hotel. Oh, before I forget, from Pier 39, by the way, there's also one of the best views of the Golden Gate Sound, and you can see Alcatraz and all other sorts of stuff. So if you happen to be there on a day where there is, oddly enough, no fog and the weather is good, this is actually a very good place to just sit and take in the scenery, which is incredibly beautiful. And in fact, one of the best places I found to just relax in San Francisco. After dinner, after all, we walked back to our hotel and got some sleep to get ready to leave San Francisco and go in several stages towards Las Vegas. But that will be in my US Travel Diaries number 6. So for now, that is the end. Well, that was it. I hope you enjoyed that. My first sort of real travel diary history. The other ones were just something I had to get past. The vacations were very interesting, but this was where my American adventures sort of truly began, when me and my dad started to have our voyages together. But, I shall return to this. In fact, as I said, take you to Las Vegas over a couple of fairly amusing episodes on the way there, including a very disappointing visit to an aquarium and a even more disappointing visit to a Danish village in Southern California. But until then, I have been the Sage, and I wish you all a very happy day.